This is your brain. This is your brain during puberty. We all know about the growth spurts, body hair, and the changes in our most intimate areas. But what about the changes that go on inside our minds? And how do these changes lead to us reaching sexual maturity? Let's find out what happens to our brains when we go through puberty. Puberty is the name given to the process in life where we go from childhood to adulthood. On average, it all begins at around age 10 for girls. As for boys, they're a little slower off the starting block, beginning puberty at the average age of 11. This can vary, of course, and one of the reasons why is directly linked to our brains. Children who have experienced great deals of stress throughout childhood are actually more likely to start puberty earlier than some of their peers. This is important to note, because while we think of puberty as something that happens to us as teenagers, our brains are literally being shaped for it from the minute we're born. Children's brains actually go through a growth spurt of their own well before puberty. By the time a child reaches the age of 6, their brain is roughly 90 to 95% of an adult-sized brain. There's a lot going on in those little heads, and the gray matter that the kids are carting around inside them isn't that little after all. So, if children are already big-brained at such an early age, surely there can't be too many brain changes that occur during puberty, right? Wrong! Within puberty, the human brain continues to make incredible adjustments. One of the most impactful is what's known as pruning. It's your brain's way of saying, use it or lose it. Now, it might sound like that's our brain throwing some stuff out into the garbage that we might have use for someday, but what pruning really does, it makes our brains more efficient. The connections, or synapses that we use often are reinforced, making us all the more capable of quick thinking. This process doesn't just improve the speed at which we can think though, it also allows us to be more concise with our thoughts, essentially making us feel all the more capable and well-equipped to deal with whatever life throws our way. As some synapses get strong, the ones we don't use are left to fade out. Eventually, around 40% of all the synapses we started with are eliminated. It's a survival of the fittest that greatly benefits our young minds. There is one problem though. The pruning process happens in stages, meaning some parts of the brain get their enhancements far sooner than others. Remember, pruning begins in the back of the brain, so the front or prefrontal cortex is left until last. This part of the brain is linked to reasoning, problem solving, comprehension, social behavior, and impulse control. It is also heavily linked to personality expression. This part of the brain doesn't completely finish development until we're in our early to mid-20s. And so, as teenagers, we are working with a brain that, by all accounts, should have an under construction sign posted up somewhere inside. You see, as we gain the ability to process far more complex thought thanks to the pruning process, the connections between the networks that handle emotion are strengthened. We become better able to recognize when someone else is feeling happy, sad, or raging with anger. The only problem is, the area of our brain that handles logic is not yet finished. This is why, as teenagers, instinct is king, and it often leads to a young person choosing the wrong solution in a situation involving another's emotions, or even one that involves their own. It also helps to explain why many teenagers indulge in high-risk behavior. And to make the prefrontal cortex development even more interesting, it is actually the area of the brain linked to drug-seeking and drug-craving behaviors. Studies have shown that teenagers become addicted to nicotine faster than adults, and they do so at lower doses. Most addictions, whether they be to drugs or otherwise, start out in some form in the teenage brain. The difficulties we experience as teens are almost all thanks to this back-to-front brain development. Our struggles with impulsive behavior, our difficulties expressing emotion, and the many mistakes made because of these struggles are all linked to the prefrontal cortex. But because the prefrontal cortex is essentially closed for repairs at certain times during our journey into adulthood, there is another small part of the brain that we rely on to pick up the slack. The amygdala. This part of the brain is shaped like an almond and sits inside the temporal lobe. Its job description: emotional responses. Everything from aggression to instinctive behavior to anxiety can start out here. And so as teenagers, we sometimes rely on this part of the brain instead of the prefrontal cortex. As a result, things like anxiousness or aggression are cited as solutions during problem solving or tough decision making. Back to front brain development is why many teenage behaviors are confusing to those not living their best lives in high schools and universities around the world. There is another aspect of human behavior that the frontal lobes are involved in: sexual behavior. But before we get to that, we need to talk about hormones. The entire process of puberty is kickstarted by these little guys. Hormones are like messengers of the chemical variety, and they're made when the brain sends out a signal to the body. It's like the brain puts in a bulk order for these body-changing bad boys. Their purpose is to travel to different parts of our bodies to ensure that these parts function as intended. During puberty, testosterone for boys and estradiol for girls are the two most important hormones. These are the ones primarily made in our sexual organs. As they increase in volume, they travel to areas of the body such as the hair cells in our groins and start the physical changes we associate with puberty. What's interesting about these hormones, though, is that they can attach to the cells in our brains and alter the way in which we behave. Hormones can actually get in the way of one cell interacting with another. Testosterone levels increase in males when they're in competition. There is a theory that winning in competition, or in a fight, causes new testosterone receptors to be developed within the brain. These receptors could then alter the person's behavior each time they win, reshaping the person's brain. In the long term, hormones can reorganize the brain. This can leave you better prepared for many different situations, not just winning, and ultimately, it will leave you better equipped to deal with life as an adult. Now we understand hormones better, we can understand how the adolescent brain affects sexual behavior. Specifically, the area linked with self-control and risk analysis is ongoing in its evolution. Combine this with the new sensation brought about by sexual feelings, and as teenagers, we can be left in some seriously confusing situations. It's risk versus reward, and because of the way in which our brains develop, it's exceptionally difficult to make the right decision. Our brains are working hard, but they're sending us mixed signals. It's not all bad though, of course. The setbacks of a blossoming brain are far outweighed by the tremendous leaps forward that our brains make during puberty. Our ability to perceive hypothetical situations becomes a reality. Our cognitive thinking skills multiply, and throughout the entire timeline it takes to reach adulthood, we undergo and endure tons of new and fascinating experiences. With those, we all gain wisdom. And so, as the hair growing in strange places becomes a normal part of life, maturing becomes about far more than simple physical changes. It transforms our minds and eventually provides us with everything we need to take on the world. The human brain is by no means a simple thing to understand, but without the vital changes brought onto our brains by puberty, it's safe to say that we'd have no chance of figuring out how it all works. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now that you've learned just how fascinating puberty really is, you're ready to check out this video on all the crazy things you didn't know about sex. Thanks for watching!